before you became the $1 Million Man and you were working in the US in different territories, what did you make of when Vince McMahon decided to go national and was bringing in Cyndi Lauper, Muhammad Ali? What were you thinking from afar?
Well, I was just going, it's about time. I mean, really, my whole life revolves around the wrestling industry. I mean, my stepfather, his name was Mike DiBiase. He was also as well as a professional wrestler, he was a national amateur wrestling champion in 1946. And the one thing he didn't want me to do is be a wrestler. And that's not because he didn't love wrestling, but the lifestyle at the time that went along with the wrestling business was really hard. And I lost him when I was 15 years old, 45 years old. He was 45 years old and had a heart attack and died. It's crazy, and that having been an athlete the way he was, I think it was a hereditary thing. They call it hardening of the arteries, arteriosclerosis. But I lost him when I was 15 years old, and. But I made a promise to myself that I was going to work as hard as I could, and that I was going to become that wrestler, and that I was going to make him proud. I think I accomplished that. Yeah.
Thank you. Because, I mean, you hear the stories that a lot of old school wrestlers were pretty angry at the direction that Vince was taking wrestling into. Did it take you any time to adapt to it, or did you straight away think, yeah, this is the right?
Well, I guess when I first heard, it's kind of like, yeah, I mean, it's kind of like, it's kind of like, it's like Vince just, it's kind of like let the cat out of the bag. Yeah, we're sports entertainment, okay? Yeah, it's not real. Well, that was like that was a big no-no, because even though we as the wrestling community understood that, it's kind of like if you ever watch a magician, he really didn't pull that rabbit out of the hat, and how did it get there? It's all sleight of hand, but you don't give away what you're doing. And so in wrestling, we always felt like, or the old school, always felt like the more that we can keep the people believing that this is real, I mean, the more they're going to be into it. And so that was like the big no-no, and Vince broke it. But in reality, it opened up a whole new world, because what Vince was starting to do, because he was looking down the road, and it was kind of like he was targeting a new market: kids, toys, action figures, video games, all of that stuff is where Vince was going with it. And ultimately, he did a pretty good job. So, yeah, just because I was raised old school, at first I was like, pissed off at Vince and all that. But by the time, here's what I remember. I had a really good deal in Japan, so I was going back and forth to Japan, wrestling over there and doing very well, making good money. And but when I picked the paper up one day, it says, World Wrestling Federation sets indoor world attendance record. 93,000 people at the Pontiac Silverdome witnessed WrestleMania 3. When I read that, I said, well, I'm going to have to go to work for Vince McMahon. And, but the way that it all went about was just crazy. I mean, it's kind of like, again, I had this good deal, my base was Japan. Japan was always going to be good. Of course, I would have to go over there on 3-week tours, 5-week tours. It was also hard on the family because I was gone so much. But then Bruce Pritchard called me one day and he said, Ted, he said, listen, he says, a couple things have happened since you've been gone. I was in Japan. He says, Bill Watts sold Mid-South Wrestling. Now, Bill Watts is a brilliant guy. And I said, sold it to who? He said, Jimmy Crockett. And he says, here's what you need to know. Do not sign a contract with Jimmy Crockett or anyone until you have an opportunity to speak with Vince McMahon because he's extremely interested in you. So I said, okay, wow. And so then I waited for that first call and I flew up to New York and what Vince basically said to me, he says, Ted, he said, everything's been done in wrestling. It's been done, it's been redone. He said, but this idea is something fresh, it's new. He says, the one thing everybody hates is someone who, by virtue of their wealth, bullies people. I said, I can't stand assholes like that myself. And, he says, but that's basically the essence of this character. And he says, I think you're good on the microphone, you're good in the ring. I really think you could pull this thing off. And I was like, wow, you can't seem too anxious. So, so anyway, I said, okay, I'm going to have to go and think it over and speak it over with my wife and what have you and all that. So I did that. It didn't take me very long. And so I called him back and I said, okay, I'm your guy. I'm in. And so I said, what is it? And he says, I'm not going to tell you on the phone. So then he flies my wife and I both to New York from Mississippi, first class, limousine service to Stamford, Connecticut, and already starting to do the deal. And so I signed a contract with him, and that's basically what he said. Everybody hates that guy. And he said, and we're going to really, and the other thing is we're really going to try to make the public believe as much as possible that you are that guy. I said, well, how are you going to do that? He said, we're going to fly you everywhere, first class. There's going to be limo service for you at every airport, airport, hotel, Coliseum, hotel, airport. He says, I think you could be one of the hottest heels we've ever had. I said, yeah, to the public and to the dressing room. I mean, the only other people that were getting that kind of treatment was, number one, who had become the big star, Hulk Hogan, and of course, Andre the Giant. Well, Andre the Giant was 7 feet 4 inches tall, 450 pounds. He ain't going coach anyway. You couldn't get him in a coach seat, and but anyway, that's how we started. And I signed with him, and my wife was with me. And when I left his office, and he said, "Now the limo's out there." He says, "I've got a really nice room for you and your wife in Manhattan. I called it the Helmsley Palace. It's like one of the, like ritziest hotels in New York City, and that limo is at your service." He says, "I want you to go start being the $1 Million Man." Man, I was like a kid in a candy store at first. Like, golly, I can't believe this is happening. And when I told my wife, she was like, "What? Really?" And that was the beginning. That's how it started. And then I can't remember how much longer there was before that I actually appeared. But I know that there at the beginning, the one thing they wanted to be sure of is, keep the heat. And so the lead-in to WrestleMania 4 was
the big Saturday night's main event match.
Yeah.
Well, I did want to ask you about once you debuted on TV and you're the $1 Million Man, you start doing these sort of skits to humiliate, you know, a little boy trying to do basketball, or Linda McMahon, or a future Rob Van Dam. What are your memories of doing those skits and sort of establishing yourself as a monster?
Well, I mean, all of them were staged. Well, maybe not all of them, okay? But the one that I hear about the most is the little kid in the basketball. You know, and so we were in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and they said, well, what can we do with Ted's gimmick tonight? And I said, well, what's Milwaukee famous for? And somebody said, beer and basketball. And I said, well, we can't do anything with beer, so let's do something with a basketball. So we did the deal where I get the kid, and I said, okay, can you dribble? He dribbles the ball 10 times. I said, if you can do that again 15 times without missing, I'm going to give you $500. And I can tell you and your family need it. What a asshole, right? And so he gets to 14, and I just kind of stick my foot out and make the ball bounce off of my foot. Tough kid. It's too bad. Unfortunately, son, at a very young age, you're going to have to learn a hard lesson. When you don't get the job done, you don't get paid. And I mean, crocodile tears, ran to his mother, and oh my gosh. And so when I got backstage, everybody was going, yes, 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 that was great. I said, I'm glad you're all happy. Now find an armored vehicle to get me out of the building. I mean, the people want to kill me. And so now here's the kind of the mic drop. 20 years later, right? I fly into Omaha, Nebraska, where I'm originally from. I'm renting a car, and this guy taps me on the shoulder, and I turn around, and I'm looking at his chest, and I'm 6'4". Wow. And he says, hey, Mr. DiBiase, he says, I recognize you. He says, I'm the manager here, can I help you find and rent a car? He says, sure. I said, find something that fits both of us. He'd be happy to. And he says, by the way, he says, do you remember that thing you did with the kid in the basketball? It was just the expression on his face. I went, no. It was him. And so I said, he says, you're really going to love this. I went to college on a basketball scholarship. Wow. Either I really inspired him, or boy, I know how to pick him, right? And that was great. You know.
And you also got put with Virgil as your bodyguard. You know, did you guys get along straight away? What did you think about the idea of Virgil being your bodyguard?
Hey, you know, it's like, I didn't mind. I mean, it's like, you know, this is whatever you want to do. And the thing about Virgil, his real name was Mike Jones, and he's a real likable guy. He just, I don't know how else to put it. He just wasn't very bright. You know, like sometimes you knock on the door and nobody's there. But he was, you know, but his job was obviously to be like my chauffeur, limo driver, and all that stuff. I mean, we couldn't get away with that today. No way, no way. I mean, you know, everybody in Washington would be coming down on us, right? So, you know, the whole civil rights deal. But so yeah, Virgil was, you know, the guy. And what's funny is, like, why did we name him Virgil? Well, it was kind of a rib. You know, there's another very famous wrestler who is very good, and whose son is currently one of the top stars in the WWE, and that would be Dusty Rhodes. Dusty's real first name is Virgil. So that was just like an inside joke. Okay.
And then later on, when Virgil went to WCW, he became Vincent as a kind of rib back to Vince.
Yeah.
So, you know, you declared on TV in late 1987 that you wanted to buy Hulk Hogan's WWF Championship from him, and then you did some house shows with Hogan. What was it like to work with Hogan in terms of his in-ring style against your in-ring style?
There was no problem at all. I mean, because, you know, and that's the other thing. sometimes I think the Hulkster gets a bad rap. I mean, he says, well, he really wasn't a great wrestler. Well, when you're 6 foot whatever he is and you weigh 300 pounds and you're solid muscle, you don't have to be a great wrestler, on the mat wrestler. It's like what he knew and understood was the gimmick. That was the main thing. And so I had no trouble with Hulk. I mean, what do you mean? I mean, I really enjoyed wrestling him because when I was wrestling him, I was getting big paychecks, pal. And that's what it's all about.